Hey guys, Tom Henderson, the founder of RESGEN here, and I want to welcome you to this episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, integrating our faith into every area of our life, and talk about ways that we as men can give life to others, at home, at work, and in the community. Before we get into today's show, I want to let you know that the tickets for RESGEN Men's Summit 2024, which takes place on Saturday, February 3rd, are on sale now at resgen.org. This annual RESGEN event gathers over 1,100 men right here in Sioux Falls and thousands more online and at simulcast sites from 8 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. for a half day of encouragement, laughter, and challenge. This year's speakers include college football analyst David Pollack, executive coach and author Ryan Leak, former Army Ranger and Black Hawk helicopter pilot Jeff Strucker, and North Coast Church pastor Chris Brown. Tickets are only $35, and they will sell out, so I encourage you to get you and your friends registered as soon as you can at resgen.org. All right, my guest today is a good friend of mine named Jason VanRuler. Jason is a licensed therapist, speaker, executive coach, and the author of his brand new book, Get Past Your Past: How Facing Your Broken Places Leads to True Connection. On today's show, Jason and I talk about his personal story of brokenness and healing, and what prompted him to write this extremely helpful book. In addition, Jason and I visit about the role that forgiveness and vulnerability play in our ability to truly connect with others, and how we can overcome some of the biggest obstacles that get in the way of personal healing. We also talk about steps that we can all take that will help us move from brokenness to wholeness, both individually and in our relationships with others. I'm really glad that you're here for this episode. It's going to be a good one. Here's my conversation with Jason VanRuler. Jason, man, it is great to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm on a lot of podcasts. Not many invite me back. So This is an honor. So well, we're off to a good start.
I always say, like, whenever I get invited back to somewhere to speak, I always love to start by saying, listen, that means I didn't screw up too badly the first time, right? And so
I will make up for lost time.
We'll see how the second one goes. But I say that because you were on, I want to say early on in season 2. Mm-hmm. And that was when you and I were really just we'd had like one breakfast together, and we were like, man, there's some good conversation there. We should bring it to the Giving Life podcast table. But since then, I mean, it's been well over a year, many breakfast meetings. And so it's fun to be able to come back and sit at this table with you. So I know how busy you are right now. So for you to take time and come and hang out with me for a minute, man, I love it.
Where else would I want to be? This is amazing. Of course, here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So for some, this will be an introduction to who you are. I kind of, gave a little intro and talked about all the different roles that you have in your life. But I'd love for you just kind of introduce yourself real quick, to tell a little bit about your family. Mm-hmm. And then I want to kind of get into your story a little bit, that because as we kind of really focus our conversation around some of the content of your book and just other conversations that you and I have had, one of the things that I loved about your book is that you actually began by unpacking some of your story for us.
Yep.
Which is, I would say, not probably very common for therapists to do. I
think I broke some rules. Yeah, there were some rules broken.
Well, as one reader, I both read the book and I listened to it on Audible, by the way. I'm so glad you did break the rules because it was very meaningful to me. But before we get into all that, just I'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell about your family and all that.
Yeah. Yep. So I am a therapist. I've been married for 17 years. I've got 3 kids and a puppy. So I love to help people. My story is just that I feel called to do this work, and so it's easy for me to show up to do it. But I just find so much honor and purpose in meeting with people and talking through kind of who they are and where they're going. And so that's really become my life. And as a result, I think my family's better for it. I don't know if they do all the time, because they're like, oh, therapist Jason's coming around. This is great.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is that hard sometimes to feel like, because I'm imagining that your wife and kids are like, wait, are you doing some kind of like therapist voodoo mind tricks right now? I mean, did I just enter the therapist office as opposed to just being at the kitchen table with my dad?
It's unfortunate. It happens. And they never pay their bill. I bill them every single month. Yeah. They never pay it. I have to try to stay out of that, honestly, because I think going from work to home it's easy to kind of take this approach of, well, I'm looking in on it and judging it instead of just walking that out with them. But luckily, my wife is very good at saying like, no, thanks. No, thanks. No, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
You're not going to sit in that chair. I'm not going to sit on the couch. We're not doing this. And so it's been a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's being a preacher, pastor, speaker guy, like I can remember vividly so many times my kids looking at me at random times and saying, Dad, I don't need a sermon right now. Right. And it's very simple, and we don't mean to, but it's hard, especially in our world, to always leave our work mentality, not just even just our work, but our work mentality at the office or at the construction site or wherever we happen to, work and have that be our jobs. But I would expect in your world that would be even a little bit, just because you're like, I'm just trying to have a conversation with you. Like,
how do you feel about that? And they're just like, okay, we're not doing that right now. No, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank
this
you.
is stuff that actually dads ask, like, and husbands
they should
ask.
be asking you this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's great. Thank you for introducing yourself in that way. And as I said, one of the things that I felt was really meaningful to me, and knowing you as well as I do, it was meaningful to even hear more about you and what makes Jason, and the road that you traveled to get to where you are. And as I listened, Laura and I actually listened as we were driving home from a weekend away in Minneapolis. And if you were wondering, if you listen to the book at 1.3 times speed from Minneapolis to my driveway, it's perfect. It's okay. You read to us the entire way home.
Good to know.
So that was great.
And you stayed awake.
And I stayed awake. I did stay awake for sure the entire time. But you talked about how just the story of your past. And as I listened, I just thought it was such a great example of how we're all products of our past, but yet we don't have to be prisoners of it. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that came through as you shared some of your story of brokenness, some of your upbringing, your journey towards restoration, healing, wholeness, if you will. And then the call that God placed on your life to leave the corporate space that you were working in and doing quite well, to come into this world of, I want to help people heal from their brokenness and help them get to wholeness. So that's a long intro for you to say, for me to say, I'd love for you to share some of your story that brought you to this point of wanting to write the book and doing what you do.
Yeah, well, it's been a long story. It's been a long time coming. I joke with people and I tell them, when I was 8, and it's true, I journaled already. And so in my journal, I wrote, I want to write a book. I want to be a psychologist. I think I said I want to have an office with like exposed brick or something.
Wow.
Really laying the sucker out. And I think that was because I always wanted to help people and was always curious about how to help them change. But I've also always dressed like a therapist. So I was like 8 with my corduroys and my penny loafers, and job options were limited. So I said that at 8. My parents divorced at 8. So I kind of had this like, yep, I can predict how childhood's going to be. Smooth sailing, everything's going to be great. We're a middle-class family. And then my parents divorce. And so we go from like, I can predict the future to I have no idea. And it became very volatile and tumultuous. And so all the things you don't want to have happen during childhood did. And I did like a lot of people do. I left my childhood and I just said, I'm never going to live that way. Right? I'm leaving and it's going to be completely different. And I kind of declared it from the rooftop. And then fast forward a couple of years, I just built that life all over again. And I like to think it's because I didn't know how to do it differently. And I think so many of us do that with our past, where we swear it off or we make a declaration, but we actually have no idea how to do it differently. And then unfortunately, we just recreate it.
Yeah. And so it's not because you want to. I mean, you are fighting it, but it's just you don't know how to.
Right, because you can't imagine it otherwise. And so I see this all the time with clients where I'll say, like, define a healthy relationship, or what is love, or walking through some of those things, and they don't even know how to do it because they only know how they've seen it. And so I found myself in that position where I thought, I had this moment in my early 20s where I think I can predict the future if I keep doing this. Like, I actually think I know how this will end, or I pick the other side and I start to ask some questions. And so that for me was really the start of how I got here.
And were there people at that season of your life that helped you come to that kind of realization? Or was it something where you're just like, this is not a great road I'm traveling. I'm actually becoming something that I did not want to become. You were involved in, some atmospheres and environments and, partying and all this kind of stuff that you knew wasn't going to lead to a life that was fulfilling or that was going to be fruitful. So were there people that you would say like, man, they were real integral in that? Or was it just something that you felt like personally that you needed to make some changes with?
I just did the whole thing myself. I just figured it all out on my own. I did the whole thing myself. It was very easy, very easy.
Very easy.
No, there were definitely people. I think I was a slow learner. So what I talk about in the book is kind of having this realization of like, it's not working. I'm doing all the things. And that was after a night of drinking. And I think my car was like almost going to be repoed. And so I'm like, oh, I wonder how that all works, and probably not great. And I just had that moment. But I'm a slow learner. So like that wasn't like, oh, now everything changed. It was just kind of a seed that got planted. And I think for a couple of years after that, I just still tried to do it my own way. I was like, well, I know this isn't right or it's not working, but I'll figure it out. And it wasn't until some people did come in my life that it actually started to change. And one of those would be my wife, Jody, who loved me very much from the start. But she was like, hey, you should like pull it together. Like that'd be really cool if you did that.
Yeah. And you were dating at the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think she said that early on. She's just like, hey, you're amazing and pull it together. And I'd never really had someone who loved me say like, hey, like, I think you can do better. And so that helped me. That was a big catalyst. And then there were other people in my life who just said some similar message to that. But what was different for me is they said, we'll walk it out with you. So not only should you kind of pull it together, but like, we'll do this with you so you don't have to do it on your own.
And so what would you say was, so you had the people that Jody prompted you, kind of got those things moving in that direction. You had people that come alongside you. So what would you say was some of the most important steps for you personally that really helped you, move beyond being a prisoner of your past to saying like, hey, this was my past, but it doesn't have to determine my future, so to speak?
Yeah. The first step was really one of the hardest ones, which was just telling the truth to myself. I think we get in this space where we either deny it or we kind of paint it to be something else. And when we really change is when we start off just by saying like how it really is. And so for me to kind of take this inventory and say like, well, I know what I tell people about how it is, but this is how it is at home when I'm alone. And so when I started to get really honest about how it was, I could then ask for help with that. Because the thing is like, it's really hard to get help if you don't tell the truth about what you need help with. And so for me, that was a big step. I think the second thing was just asking for help and being okay with the fact that even if I asked for help, didn't guarantee that the person would help me. I'd have to do it a couple of times. And then when they did help me, listening to what they said. That was hard too, is to kind of surrender to, if I'm asking this person who knows and they're telling me, like, I probably should do it.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy.
Yeah. No, and then with that, did that come with some new boundaries that you had to set up? Some new disciplines that you had to embrace, some probably more difficult than others?
Yeah. Life got really hard for a while because it was like, I'm switching who I am. And so there's going to be boundaries and there's going to be habits and routines and all these things. And you would think you'd love that immediately, but I didn't. Anybody who's ever gone on a diet knows like the diet is healthy, but nobody loves to go on a diet.
Right.
And so I had a couple of years where it felt like I was on a diet. I was like, I really want this, but in order to get there, this is what it takes.
As I was, listening again and thinking about our time here together at the table, I was thinking about, the C.S. Lewis quote that I heard a long time ago. It says, getting over a painful experience is much like crossing monkey bars. You have to let go at some point in order to move forward. And so, as you were working through just the stuff that went on in your childhood and even the process of making a statement like, I don't want to do that. And then so there's the process of forgiving what took place in your childhood. Then there's the next step of forgiving yourself for
I made a mess
for putting yourself and making some choices, because there's a reality of there's some personal choice that comes into our decisions.
It's unfortunate, but yeah, sometimes it is our fault. You know,
Right.
that's hard, but it's true.
Right. So,
Mm-hmm.
so as you began to let go, I'd love for you to talk about like, so when you think about that journey, what are some, because one of the things that people struggle with, I know, because I know that I did for a long time, is letting go of the things that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, so there's things that we have made the choice for that have happened because of choices we've made, but then there's things that have happened in our life because of choices that were made for us.
Right.
And letting go of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that process like for you in letting go some of the hurt and the frustration of what should have been, but wasn't what it was experienced?
That's so hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we all have that longing for perfection, or that longing for the idyllic childhood or the perfect marriage or all these things. And so I think there's a lot of disappointment then when that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to let go. I think for me, what that required was really talking about it a lot,
Mm-hmm.
journaling about it, like talking about it until I got tired of it. And that's when I knew things were started to change, is that I talked about my story so many times with healthy people that could help.
Mm-hmm.
But so many times eventually I went, I'm tired of telling the story, because my relationship had changed with it. And so I think for us to really let go and move past that, it is a decision, but oftentimes there's stuff to process there that requires us to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And accepting it, that was your story, does not mean, and just like forgiveness doesn't mean that it's okay.
Right. Or that you wanted it.
Right.
Right. Or that you'd sign up for that if you could. But it is what happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you think about just forgiveness, because and you have a big section in your book that just talks about forgiveness, and forgiveness has been a big part of my story, and how the whole idea of, you said there's some hard decisions that need to be made, and I think forgiveness is one of the hardest things that we're asked to do, especially as followers of Christ.
Yeah.
Right. Because we often feel that holding someone in contempt and not forgiving them is often, punishing them. It's like, well, we're letting them off the hook, that kind of thing. But so I'm sure that we have some people out there right now that are listening and are saying, man, I really don't want to forgive this person. Mm-hmm. I really don't want to forgive this thing that happened. They don't deserve my forgiveness. I want to punch them, whatever. Like, what
did you say I want to punch them?
Punish them. Well, punching is probably in their mind too, for sure. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, I get it.
But so are there certain steps that you suggest with people saying, man, they're really dealing with unforgiveness? Here's a good first step, or the first couple steps in seeing the freedom that can come through that forgiveness.
Yeah, I think the question that I would typically ask is, how does it help you to keep that candle lit? So if you hold that in and you refuse to forgive, how does that help you to do that? Like, what benefit does that have in your life to keep that going? And that's tough. That's a tough one to answer.
Yeah.
Most people don't have an answer, right? And so if it's not helping me to do that, then what do I need to do instead?
And they're probably able to say, yeah, it really isn't helping me, but admitting that and then saying, but I've held on to it so long,
right,
that I don't know what it's like to let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be hard, right? I mean, and that's the thing, like if you make a fist, the longer you make it, when you open it, your hand opens slower.
Right.
Because when we hold on to that for a long time, it can feel scary to open that. But the thing is that that's occupying space in our life. And that space that could be used for something else. And so if it's not helping us, maybe it's time to let go a little bit and to test out what it'd be like to let it go. Now, forgiveness is a thing that, again, we don't make a declaration. Like you can say, I forgive you. It's actually a decision you have to make a lot of times over again. And so just realizing, like, I'll just try it once. Today I'm going to forgive them. I don't know about tomorrow. I'm not really sure about that.
Yeah, that's good.
Today I will. We can do that, and we see how it feels.
Yeah, that's good, Jason, because I think that, we've all been taught, I shouldn't say all, but the vast majority of us have been taught at one time or another that the statement forgive and forget, right? And that, that once you're forgiven, we read in Scripture that when we are forgiven, our sins are separated as far from us as far as the east is from the west. And so that should be our automatic response. It should be easy and all of that. But the reality is that forgiveness is one of those things that, because the memories are still alive.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's
It's not like forgive and you have amnesia. Right?
Correct.
So it's like you still remember.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just that when you forgive, I mean, you're releasing. I mean, that's how I like to describe the whole idea of forgiveness. It's a releasing. It's releasing the hurt, the pain, all those kinds of things, and giving them over to the Lord, allowing Him to shoulder and carry those things for us so that we can experience freedom from that. But the reality is that there may be times where memories flood in, anger can come in again, and it's just like, okay, God, you know what? I don't want to enter into this bondage again. So it's a re-releasing. God, help me to continue to forgive.
Yep.
You know, teach me more about what it is to live in that freedom. Because the temptation is, well, man, maybe I really haven't forgiven them then. And then we begin to doubt.
Right. Because we judge it, and it should look like this, and I should feel like that. And I think it's just, what are you doing today?
Yeah.
Today I forgive them. We'll work on tomorrow, but today I do. And I think some things are so big in our life that to really honor them, it takes a couple of times. You know, if you've been through abuse or trauma or things like that, like one time isn't going to be sufficient to honor that story.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about even just kind of what prompted you to write the book, because obviously, I mean, you've had countless conversations with so many people in a variety of really, I mean, you've had people in your office, you've flown and done counseling for couples in different types of settings. So you've been hearing stories, you've been counseling tons of people, and yet you thought, I really need to write a book so that I can really impact more people, because that was your vision, that was your heart as to why yes, you said when you were 8 years old, I want to write a book, but the motivation for writing it was really to help more people and you know, put something in their hands that could be usable and that could really help them. So was there other things that prompted you to say, now's the time to do it? I mean, how did you come to the decision of, okay, I'm going to put my fingers to the keyboard, my pen to paper, and start writing this thing?
Yeah, well, that was actually a big personal growth thing for me. I'd wanted to write a book for so long, always wanted to, but I was always terrified to do it. If I'm being really honest, it was just like, to put myself out there felt really scary. And then I had a friend come into my life who just said, well, I just think you should. And it was Bob, and Bob was like, yeah, if you want to write a book, like, just do it this weekend. And I'm like, oh, but there's like all this stuff around it. And he's like, yeah, I don't know, like, just write the book.
Yeah.
And so strangely for me, getting that permission really helped me to engage in it. What I've learned now, having the book be written and be out, is like, I probably never needed that permission, but it was the on-ramp for me to do it. The other side of that is just when I got the start at my career, I worked with people coming out of prison. And that has just been on my heart ever since I worked with them, because they really needed help and they really needed to make big changes. And so the work I do is very valuable. But the truth is, it's really hard for people coming out of prison or doing those things to have access to a lot of it. And so I thought, what if I wrote a book that like just everyone could have access to, whether they're really wealthy and doing well or they're struggling? Like, what if I could just give them the tools I wish I had gotten and help them skip some of the hard stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and I resonate with that so much, because, you know, growing up in a home where my dad wasn't around for the vast majority of it and was in prison throughout the entirety of my teen years, you know, that was one of the reasons why we really put a lot of primacy on simulcasting the Men's Summit into the prison and all of that, because I was just like, man, how do we go to them?
Yeah.
How do we give them this content and the tips and the tools that they need as they're striving to live their life, make better choices, be restored people? And so just even knowing that was part of your story of just wanting to really help those that are, you know, in kind of, I'd say for a lot of us in a forgotten area.
Yeah.
Because it's probably not too often that we're going about our day and thinking about those that are incarcerated.
Right.
You know, and so even just knowing that someone cares for them enough to write something that could resonate with them, I'm sure is got to be very rewarding to know that it is helping those that are coming out of prison.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that was kind of my sales pitch with the book. Is I said, if you've got $20 and some hope, I want to give you the tools to change.
Yeah.
And that's just really what I was going for, is like, how do we practically do that? so that you can get started. Because I think one of the hardest things when people want to change or really change their relationship with the past is they say, what do I do now? And as therapists, we're so good at saying like, well, we don't really answer questions. Like, that's a great question. But let me ask you
questions
like,
back.
What do you think you should do now? But if anybody's ever been in that spot, like what you actually need is some direction. You know, that all the good philosophical stuff, like that's good later. But initially, like, I just need to know what to do. And so my hope was to write a book just kind of telling people like, start here. Start here and do this and do the next thing, and that'll lead you to the place you need to go.
Yeah. So as you think about your book, and I've got it right here, and again, the book, I love the subtitle, by the way. You know, I mean, how facing your broken places leads to true connection. Because I think that, you know, as people have been created by a God who loves them, number one, for connection with God, but yet he created us also for connection with others, right?
Yep,
I mean, you and I agree on that for sure. And so to really think about like saying, okay, if we want to truly connect with people, we have to be willing to go into places that maybe we don't want to necessarily go into that often, because we know that's going to lead to a healthier relationship, a healthier connection. So, and I feel like I'm just like fawning over your book in front of you, but it really was.
I'll take it.
Well, and I just want you to know, bro, like, I mean, it's really, really good. And I'm hopeful that as people are listening to this, that if they're listening and saying, boy, that's not a book that I'd normally pick up, that's not normally one that I'd put in my Audible, you know, and listen to it while I'm driving down the road, I'm hopeful that they will, because it really is very helpful. So as you think about your book, I mean, I'm sure there's got to be one or two chapters in here that you're like, man, that's my favorite, you know, or that's one that is close to your heart.
Yeah.
Is there one or two in here?
For sure. The one that talks about safe people was really important, because I think what happens is, like, if you're really wounded by the past and past relationships, this whole idea of like connection seems really scary, right? So it's like, well, Tom, even though you've been burned by everyone you know, you should trust someone now.
Yeah.
And that seems like, oh, I wonder how I do that. And so what I wanted to do is break down, like, what are the attributes of people who are safe to even get started with?
Yeah.
Because what I'd see over and over again is somebody be really wounded, they'd work up all their courage to ask for help, and then they ask the wrong person. And the person rejects them or turns them down or is just not listening. And then what they do is they say, see, this is why you don't do that.
Yes.
And so what I was hoping to do is help people to skip that and say, like, let's think through who would be a good person to start with.
Yeah, no, that was very good. And it actually makes me think a little bit about just what you've been able to do and build through your Instagram channel, which I want to talk a little bit about that here today too, because what you're doing in a short and concise and understandable way, you know, through the channel and through those reels and videos that you're producing, are saying, hey, here's 3 ways to, you know, establish if someone's a safe person, or how to determine if the person you're dating is worth pursuing in a long-term marriage relationship, you know, those types of things.
Yeah.
And so I want to get into that in a second, but even before you mentioned about when you enter the book writing process, there was this permission that Bob, who you're speaking of, is Bob Goff. You know, it's a great speaker and author and good friend of yours. But so he gave you the permission. You had to kind of overcome the mental hurdle of, man, do I really have what it takes to write a book? You know,
will anyone read it?
Will anybody read it? You know, what if I put a comma in the wrong spot? I mean, that's me.
I'm sure that's happened.
I'm sure there's a lot of them, actually. No, just kidding. But
why is everything highlighted? Yeah.
But I mean, even with those Instagram reels, I think about, like, when you started those, like, did you struggle with confidence at that point and thinking like, what do I really even have to share? I mean, like,
it was rough, and I shouldn't have been confident at all, because I was like double hand waving to start every video, and it was now people are going to look at it, but it was very, very bad. But here's the thing, a verse that guides me is here I am, send me.
Yeah.
And so that is just what I want to do. And so when I first started, I said, like, I'm going to do the Instagram thing, and if it helps 10 people, awesome. And if it doesn't, I'll quit. And then it helped a lot more than that.
Yeah.
The book is the same thing. I feel like if that's what it takes is for me to lead by example, then I'll do it. And if at some point people don't want that anymore, I'll stop. You know, they're like, hey, thanks for the leading by example thing, but like, you should quit. I'll quit. But until then, I just felt like I'm going to try to share what I know and I'll be a step ahead of some people and a step behind others. So I'm going to try to help the people who are a step behind get to the place I'm at, so that they have access to those tools.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's turned out pretty well, because you went from a handful of followers at the very, very beginning when you set the thing up to now over 139,000 people that are catching them whenever they jump on Instagram, or many, of course, are purposefully going to hear the content from you. And so let me ask you this, because I know that being someone who has a deep relationship with the Lord, your faith is extremely important to you, but as a therapist, I would love to know, how do you incorporate faith conversations into your times with clients and patients? Because is that something that you just kind of let them lead as well? Because I think about, again, Dwight Moody says, let God have your life and he can do more with it than you can. Okay. Well, there's some that would say you just need to pray more.
Sure.
You just need to read your Bible more, and then you'll feel better. Well, okay, I hear that, but at the same time, yes, faith is important. Scripture 100% is important. Praying, yes, all those kinds of things, but yet there's also therapy and faith that can work together. And so as you think about that, your own relationship with God, wanting to counsel and help people, how does that work together for you?
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
So what's hard for me is that I don't see change without God. I just don't. It's just how I'm wired. It's how I think about things. And so my prayer every day when I meet with a client is just, Lord, help what needs to happen, and for me to get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I do that, to me, that means a lot, but not every client is wired the same way. Not every client believes what I believe. And so it really is client driven. What's been surprising to some people is that I haven't really taken a stance on it until I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, that is very obviously a Christian book. And I'm like,
yes,
yep,
sure.
pretty much is.
Yeah.
But again, it's because it's how I see things. And I just think for me, I don't know how to talk about change without talking about God.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people do, and that's just fine if that's their thing. I just don't know how to do that. And so for me, that's what drives my work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, speaking specifically about men, right? And obviously, RESGEN is very much focused on men and marriage and parenting and those kinds of things. And I think about one of our hang-ups oftentimes for men is that we think we should just be able to fix everything. Like our spouse comes home, begins to talk with us about something, and we say, well, here's what you should do. And here's how you can fix something.
I love that, by the way.
Oh, totally. Really takes the relationship
Yep.
to deeper levels, doesn't it? But so pride can get in the way of that. And then pride also gets in the way of our being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And in chapter 11 of your book, you talk about how vulnerability is what really will help our love grow, where we'll really be able to understand what love is and how it can grow. So I feel like vulnerability is kind of a buzzword right now.
Totally is.
I feel like it's just something
that's a little vulnerable to say that.
Yeah.
I understand.
My guess is that by the way, the word for 2022, they released that at late 2023. So the word for 2022 was authentic. That was that was Webster's word for 2022. Yeah. But I think probably a close second would have to be vulnerability. So first of all, I'd love for you to just explain how you would define vulnerability, and then I'd love for you to answer, why is it so important for men to embrace it?
Yeah. So vulnerability to me is sharing a part of your heart with boundaries. Okay. We don't often talk about the boundaries. We just say, you should be vulnerable.
That's good.
But it's really important to do that with boundaries, because not everyone's going to be helped by you sharing every thought you've ever had or dream or hurt or things like that. And so vulnerability is like we're sharing who we are at depth with some boundaries around it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're reading the room and knowing the audience when we do it.
So can you do that? Just sorry to interrupt. Can you do that with people that you wouldn't necessarily fit in your safe people category?
Yeah, there's layers.
Okay.
Right? So, if you think about your life as a bullseye, and in the very center are the people you're most vulnerable with. They get everything, right? So they get to know all the things that you would tell anybody Then the next ring is maybe your closer friends, and they get to know most, right? They don't know everything. They're not doing life with you every day, but they get to know a lot. And then we go a ring out and a ring out. And so every ring has a different level of vulnerability. And so I'm probably not going to tell, a colleague something that I'd tell my wife, right? Those are two different things because the vulnerability is different. I can be vulnerable in both places, but I might say, I really struggled with anxiety. I might say that in a general way, but to my wife, I might say, like, you see it every day.
Yeah.
Right? Or I talk to you about this. So it's having kind of a spectrum is really important, because always what I see happen is, because it's a buzzword, we're like, hey, go be vulnerable. And you're like, let me vulnerably tell you something. And then they do, and they're rejected in it because they gave too much to the wrong room.
Yeah. Okay. So that said, why is it then so important for men to embrace vulnerability?
Yeah. Because people have something to connect to. Even in this conversation, when you talked about your father, you did that with boundaries, right? You didn't share for a half hour. You kind of said, like, hey, vulnerably speaking, here's a part of me. I feel closer to you as a result, because I go, yeah, like, that's Tom's story. Had you not done that, it's harder to connect. And so I think as men, sometimes we think it's weakness, but it's actually an opportunity for connection. But we just have to learn how to do it well. Which,
again, calls us to lay down our pride, take off our mask, because that's another thing that men struggle with sometimes is we struggle with our ability to admit that we need connection, right? Because it's just so much easier to go at it alone.
Yep.
Pull ourselves up by our bootstraps.
But is it really easier?
Well,
I know we tell ourselves that.
Totally. Yeah. But that's what is in our mind. So then we say, well, but if we risk taking off the mask and desiring or saying we desire that connection, what happens if we do get turned down, or what happens if we do say the wrong thing? What happens if I don't get invited to lunch tomorrow because I said something?
Right. But or what happens if I'm filled with regret because I didn't?
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's good, because there's all sorts of what ifs.
Yeah, it's a gamble both ways.
Right.
I mean, neither one is without risk. And so what I would say is, like, if you haven't tried it, try it and see. Maybe you swear it off. Maybe you say, vulnerability is not for me. Jason, I've tried it 10 times and there's good reason why. Okay. But, like, I'm just asking people to consider the option.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Okay. So let me ask you this, because we all have hurts. We all have some pain. We all have some hang-ups in life and so forth. And there's always things that at different levels people need to heal from.
Yep.
What are you seeing as some of the biggest obstacles that people have that are keeping them from overcoming, and healing? And then I'd love for you, the second part of that is, maybe just a couple of steps that are having some people that, as listeners, maybe they have some people in their lives that they're having trouble with, or things in their life that they're having trouble overcoming, that they can maybe even put into practice a little bit.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest obstacles that you see?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is just really what we tell ourselves about what happened. That's the biggest thing, is that we get in this headspace of, we experience something and we take away a message about ourselves from that, and then we live that out. So some people will have a message that, I'm not to be successful, or I'm unlovable, or I'm not worthy, and they take that away from an experience, and maybe that was true in that experience. Maybe that was the message, but it doesn't translate to the rest of their life. And so the obstacle becomes them keeping that message alive, right? And so them saying, like, yep, I'm not worthy, and then walking that out today in all their relationships. So I think what we're trying to do is just change the relationship with the past and change what we took away from that. I think it was really interesting, like for Y2K, the government had a decision to make. Do we go back and do we code all the coding language in the old antiquated language, or do we update it and risk losing everything? Okay. And that was their decision to make, is like, do it the old way, even though we know it's broken, or do it the new way. And I think we're in that place all the time, because we all have that past. And so it's kind of like, do I do it the old way, or do I learn to do it a new way? Both are scary, both are risky, but one gives opportunity and the other doesn't. And so I see people get stuck in that space. I think if you're here and you're just listening today, like, the thing I would ask you is just to think for a second about, what is the thing from the past that just keeps getting in the way? And if I pause long enough, we all think of something. There's always a thing. And then my next question would be, what is it about that gets in the way? And what might I need to do with that? And those three prompts, those will get you started. And the next one I would just say is like, who do I talk to about that? So, well, what gets in my way about the past is, I just believe I'm not lovable. And it comes up in my relationships and I don't know what to do because all of them fail. Okay, what do I need to do about that? Well, I should talk to somebody. Okay, who do you talk to? A friend, a pastor, a therapist? Like, who do I start with? And then go do that.
Yeah, that's really good, Jace. I mean, I think about, again, part of my journey of when we first entered into marriage, Laura and I, for the first couple of years, it was very difficult because my experience as a child was seeing a marriage broken up, a dad leaving, that kind of thing. And so the first couple of years, not quite 2 years, but almost ahead of every day waking up thinking that was the day that Laura was possibly going to leave. And so the message that I took from my past experience was that, I'm not worth sticking around for, or it's only a matter of time until this person who says they love me is going to leave. But it took lots of conversations, and that's not something that I could really deal with completely on my own.
Right.
I mean, I tried to.
Right.
I'll tell you this.
Nice.
I tried to, but it just created more angst. It just created more anger at times. It created more distrust because the message seemed to get louder and louder. And I believe that it's when the enemy, Satan, has a foothold that they can grab a hold of in our mind and begin to foster that. You're right. You aren't worth sticking around for.
Right.
You are, someone that just is going to get left time and time and time again. And then we begin to just marinate in that thought.
And we make it true.
That's exactly right. And sometimes, let me ask you this, as I think about experiences in the past, sometimes we're tempted to even embellish the things of the past. Have you found that to be true?
Like, we color them a different way that honors a story we tell ourselves.
Yeah. So, but it was through the understanding and just that forgiveness piece of forgiving what happened in my past, recognizing that, yes, that was a part of my past. It wasn't fair. It wasn't something I desired, but forgiveness brought freedom from being chained to that past any longer. That was keeping me from having true connection with the one that married me for that purpose.
Who loves you.
Yeah.
And now today it's a springboard for connection.
Yeah.
Right? Because you share your story and it brings us together.
Yeah. So as we're going to need to kind of end our time here together, but I do want to say, I feel like therapy has gotten to be a little bit more acceptable. And that the stigma maybe of counseling and going to therapy has changed a little bit. And is that true? Because there's a lot more conversations, I think, even commercials that talk about just depression, anxiety, and all that kind of thing. So would you say that mental illness is on the rise, or that maybe just we're a little bit more open to the idea of counseling today?
Yes.
Yes and yes.
Yeah, I think it's on the rise. I think COVID really launched some things and exacerbated some existing problems. And I think we're also more willing to have these conversations. I think what's still challenging is that it's still out of reach for a lot of people. So we've normalized therapy, but therapy isn't normal for a lot of people. They don't have the time or the money or the resources to actually do that. And so while I love that we're talking more about it, I want to see that become even more accessible. Because I think otherwise, sometimes what it does is it just isolates us even more. If you're a person who can't afford therapy or don't have access and all the answers lead back to therapy, there's a really big problem because then it starts to feel like it's not for me. And so I love that we're getting more resources and online therapy and more access because I think that really is important. So I love the conversation about therapy. I'd like to see it shift into access to therapy. I think that would be really helpful.
So what does that look like? Because, you can't just, your heart wants to help all these people, right?
Right.
But yet your calendar doesn't allow you to. And you can't give away all your counseling sessions for free all the time.
Right.
So
that's what my wife tells me.
Yeah. But so where's the answer in that? Like, what do you think that looks like?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
It really is. It's getting more people in the field. I think doing group therapy, you can do things that help with that. But to your point, like that is always been the question. Is how do we really do this and have people who are well trained that can help?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times, pastors, because of their desire to help people, care for people, a lot of times they're asked to counsel people, and they're probably providing some great counsel,
Sure.
Great things to think about, and being really helpful. But at the same time, there is a specific set of skills that a person like yourself would have versus a pastor versus a life coach.
Yep.
As the prominence of life coaches have become a lot more, there's just a lot more prevalent in our world today as well. So I remember actually in your book, you talked about saying, like, if we did these things, I think we'd have a lot less people needing to go to therapy.
Right.
Which I can't remember right now. Do you remember what I'd love for you to do you remember those right off the top of your head? Well, you about what you said.
Well, it was having a good friend.
Yeah. That's what it was. Yeah. Which again, for men sometimes is difficult because
I
it's
think
like
a lot of therapists are mad about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's true. I think God calls us to community. And increasingly we say we have it, but we don't. And so if we really did, a lot of this would be solved.
Yeah.
And that's not because I want to hurt the therapy business, but I just think like a lot of us are really hungry for a very normal need, which is just to have friends and connection. And when we have that, we have people to talk to, a lot of this stuff goes away.
Yeah.
There's still a need for therapists, but I just always ask people, like, start there.
Yeah.
Like do the free thing first, and then we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and I think about it, like, God has blessed with a lot of great friends in my life, but it was until I could go to a therapist and really get into understanding the brain and the way it was recalling memories, different triggers in my brain, all of that, that I really was able to process and think about, okay, here's where I can, maybe there's little cracks, maybe I'm not fully broken anymore, but there's little cracks that still need to be mended and healed and all that. So it was super helpful. My friends weren't able to offer that expertise and that kind of counsel. But what they are able to do is to represent someone that's journeying with me through life.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the point that you're talking about, is that
we need both.
We are created to be in relationship with God and others. We journey through them, but then we also need to be okay with the idea of, if we go and we have the flu, if we have cancer, we're going to go see a doctor. Right.
Yeah.
And that's normal.
Yeah.
That's normal.
I go to the dermatologist once a year to have my moles checked out.
Yeah.
I love you, Tom, but we're not doing that together.
Right.
Okay. So that's just,
well, we can go to the dermatologist together if you want.
We're not doing the exam together, my friend. I don't trust you on that one. So I think it's just, you need both. And just in all honesty, like you've been that friend to me. You know, you've been a safe person in my life that I could say, like, hey, here's kind of what's going on with me. And you ask good questions and you care. And that really helps. And then, like you said, then there are going to be some times where it's like, where there's another layer.
Right.
And that other layer is for somebody else who is trained in helping me with this. And so they will. So I think there's room for both.
Yeah, that's great. That's great counsel right there. All right. So I want to end our time here that because and maybe there's going to be some reiteration of some stuff that you already talked about, but it's okay. But I'd love for you to just share just some simple steps. And I like to say the word simple because a lot of times, especially as guys, sometimes we make things often harder than they need to be.
I'd never do that, but yes,
yeah.
I hear that. Yeah.
But we sometimes make them harder. And if we could just have that in mind, like, hey, this might not be as hard as I think it is, or it has to be. So just simple steps to help take steps from brokenness to wholeness individually and in our relationship with others. Because, let's face it, our world is tough. Okay. The enemy's on attack.
Yep.
The enemy wants to destroy us individually, wants to destroy our relationships. So what are some simple steps that we can take, that any listener can take, that will help them move from brokenness to wholeness individually and in their relationships?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be a therapist here.
Yeah.
Full disclosure. So I'm going to recommend journaling. But the first thing I would just say is, like, how's it going really? So if you're really honest with yourself and you were to write down, like, where are things at presently in your life, and are they where you want them to be? And go through some of the big ones, like my job, my marriage, my kiddos, like, how is all of that actually going? If it's not where I want it to be, what do I make up about why that is? Okay. And what role do my experiences play in that, if any? Okay. And then again, kind of what do I need to do about that? Or what is the theme or the thread? And who would I talk to? Really, if you can zero in on kind of like, this is the area that's not working, this is kind of where I think that comes from, and this is the person to ask, you are light years ahead of most. Just doing that is getting you on the right track to getting help.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, isn't it funny too? It's just like, well, if I do that, then I'll be light years ahead of everybody else, and then that makes us feel good, right? Because
that's what I'm going for.
We enter the comparison game.
I beat that guy. Yeah, exactly. I totally beat that guy. Exactly. I beat you. Yep.
Exactly. Well, brother, this has been so good. As you know, I love all of our conversations, and I love that we were able to bring this important conversation to others. As we were entering this time, and as I was thinking about our time together, I was just praying that God would use this time to really help other people, meet them where they're at. And so thank you for being willing to do that. If people want to connect with you, how best do they do that? How do they find a copy of your book, all that kind of stuff?
Yep. Books, all major retailers. So that'd be a good way to do it. And then Instagram's jason.vanruler, or my website, jasonvr.com.
Okay, that's great. Well, as you know, because you've been a guest before and you've listened to other episodes, we end our time kind of with this thing called the final word, 30 to 90 seconds, whatever the Lord lays on your heart to just share as a final message of encouragement, challenge, whatever, for listeners today. So what's your final word, brother?
Yeah, I think if you are listening and you're doing the thing where whatever's bothering you is too much or not enough, I just say don't do that. I, for a long time, said my story is too much for this person and not enough for that. And so I kind of sat in this place of judging if I really needed help and what kind of help, and if it was even qualified. And I think just ask the question. Just have the conversation. The best thing that could happen is I could say, hey, Tom, I'm really struggling with this. And you're like, okay, totally get it. And we fix it in a minute. Like, that would be the best outcome. So if you're listening to this, just understand that, like, our past doesn't have to be this terrible, ugly thing. Maybe you say, I come from a great upbringing, Jason, so like that doesn't apply. Regardless, there are still things we take into today, and we want to look at those and see how they're affecting us.
That's really good. That's really good. Because again, we do get to that comparison saying, well, man, my past was great, so that's not, or it was
not
great.
An issue.
Yeah, not an issue, but that's good final encouragement and a great final word. Jason, thank you for your time. Really appreciate your friendship.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jason VanRuler today. As always, if you found the episode helpful, I encourage you to share with others that may find it helpful as well. If you'd like to connect more with Jason, be sure to visit jasonvr.com. And of course, be sure to follow him on Instagram at jason.vanruler. Lastly, don't forget to head to resgen.org to check out all the information and to grab your ticket for RESGEN Men's Summit 2024, which again is coming up on Saturday, February 3rd. I cannot wait to see you there. All right, that's all for today, friends. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time for another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others. We'll see you soon.